I never told my daughter Amber about Warehouse 42, or the real secret hidden inside it. Not until my gold-digging son-in-law showed up. He always thought I was just an old junkyard man with a treasure, and that he could easily outsmart me to take it. Welcome back to Dad's real-life revenge. Grab a drink, some snacks, get comfortable, and remember the people in these stories had every opportunity to do the right thing, they simply chose not to. Leave a number 1 in the comments, so we can continue the story, and hit subscribe. I think you're going to enjoy this one. Rain hammered against the corrugated metal roof of the old scrapyard. The roar of the downpour echoed like a hydraulic crusher running at full capacity. I sat alone in my office. The room was thick with the smell of engine oil, rust, and time itself. On my desk sat a cup of black coffee that had gone cold long ago. The light from an old desk lamp fell across my hands. Thick calluses, deep scars carved into the flesh. They were the marks of 40 years spent wrestling with steel. These hands had built an empire from piles of scrap, and these same hands knew exactly how to dismantle anything that had outlived its value. The phone suddenly rang. A dry, sharp sound sliced through the pounding rain. I picked up. On the other end came the hurried breathing of Marcus, my loyal warehouse manager. "Mr. Vance, they're here. 3 of them. Their headlights are off. They're using bolt cutters on the chain at the west gate. The one leading them is Chad. He's got 2 armed men with him. Should I call the police now?" I leaned back in my leather chair. My face never changed. My heartbeat remained perfectly steady. A calmness that had been carefully calculated. I looked at the security monitor. Through the infrared cameras I could clearly see Chadwick Montgomery, my beloved son-in-law, the man with soft, well-groomed hands that always smelled of expensive cologne. He was trembling as he gripped the bolt cutters and snapped the lock. The parasite had finally crawled into the steel trap. I tapped a finger lightly against the wooden desk. Sharp, cold. "No, Marcus. I want you and every security guard to pull out immediately. Leave through the back exit. Clear the entire yard. Shut down every audible alarm. I want to leave the door wide open for the rat. Let him believe he's the smartest man alive tonight." Marcus hesitated for a second before answering clearly. The call ended. I stood and walked over to the frosted window. Outside lay a dark yard filled with mountains of rusted steel. Chad believed he was the hunter. He believed he was about to get his hands on $15 million worth of platinum after accidentally reading a confidential document left on my desk. He had no idea that every single step he was taking had already been built into a blueprint I had designed myself. Steel must pass through fire before it can be shaped. A person's true nature only reveals itself when faced with greed. Tonight I was going to strip away every polished layer of my son-in-law's disguise the same way I dismantled an old scrap truck. One piece at a time. Until nothing remained but a rotten frame. The rain outside my office continued to roar. Thunder rumbled across the sky, pulling my mind back to a warm April evening 3 months earlier. It was the 5th wedding anniversary of Amber and Chad, celebrated at an elegant French restaurant downtown. The air was filled with the scent of scented candles and the gentle music of a violin. I sat there out of place in my plain tailor-made work suit. Across from me sat Chadwick Montgomery. He wore a silk dress shirt and his cufflinks glittered beneath the chandelier. His hands were soft, pale, with perfectly manicured, polished nails. Hands that had never spent a single day lifting anything heavier than 1 pound. The hands of a man who knew only how to sign meaningless papers and spend other people's money. Chad raised his glass of red wine and looked at me with quiet condescension in his eyes. He took a small sip, smiled, and began to speak. His voice rose and fell with the polished insincerity of a politician campaigning for votes. "Dad, I honestly think you should reconsider my offer from last time. Your scrap business is outdated. It's nothing but piles of rusty, dusty, toxic junk. This is the age of technology and venture capital funds in Dubai. You've devoted your whole life to that junkyard. It's time to sell the Warehouse 42 property and let me manage the capital. I'll multiply it tenfold. All you have to do is retire and enjoy your old age." I looked down at my plate. Then I looked back at my own hands. Large knuckles. Calluses as hard as stone earned through decades of lifting steel. These hands had raised Amber. These hands had turned what other people threw away into millions of dollars. I said nothing. The silence of a blacksmith testing the hardness of a flawed piece of metal. Amber, sitting beside him, immediately reached for Chad's hand. She looked at me, her eyes filled with pleading but also disappointment. She had been completely blinded by the illusion of his polished charm. She said Chad only wanted what was best for me, that I was too stubborn and too suspicious. I didn't argue. I simply laid my knife and fork down. Then I looked Chad straight in the eyes. I could see greed dancing behind his fashionable contact lenses. He didn't see a father. He saw nothing more than an aging gold mine that he believed would be easy to manipulate. He called my scrapyard garbage, but he had no idea that the very garbage he mocked would become the grave that buried his entire career and reputation. I took a sip of water, offered him a faint smile, and answered in a voice so calm it was almost unsettling. A deliberately ambiguous reply, one that planted a seed of obsessive curiosity deep inside him. That single seed of ambition would eventually lead him straight to the gate of Warehouse 42 on this storm-filled night. My silence at the restaurant that night didn't make Chad give up. Quite the opposite. It convinced him that I was beginning to waver. 2 weeks after that anniversary dinner, Chad decided to accelerate his plan. He brought Amber with him and came straight to my old house late one afternoon. I was sitting in the living room. Chad walked in with complete confidence. He slammed a thick stack of documents wrapped in crocodile leather onto my wooden coffee table. He didn't bother offering a proper greeting. He got straight to the point. His voice was louder now, filled with authority and manipulation. Dad, this is the last opportunity for our family. I've already prepared the financial package for the Montgomery Investment Fund. Every term is perfect. All you have to do is sign the authorization giving me full authority over Warehouse 42. I'll transfer the property to a foreign partner next week. If you don't sign, we'll lose the $500,000 deposit. I had to borrow that money from everywhere I could. You can't let your selfishness and stubbornness destroy our future. I never touched the documents. I simply looked at them through my reading glasses. The numbers had been forged with remarkable sophistication. Fake profits, fake cash flow. Every page was nothing more than a paper trap designed to swallow my scrapyard whole. I lifted my eyes toward Amber. My daughter stood directly behind her husband. Her face was filled with tension and worry. But what hurt me most was the look in her eyes. She looked at me with unmistakable resentment. She believed I was a foolish old man clinging to an outdated pile of scrap metal while making his own family suffer. She stepped forward, her voice choked with emotion but unwavering. Dad, please listen to Chad just this once. He stayed up all night working on this plan for our family. Why are you holding on to that old warehouse? Are you planning to take it with you to the grave? Why do you always doubt the man I love? My daughter's words drove into my chest like a bar of red-hot steel. The pain hardened into an overwhelming coldness inside my mind. Standing beside her, Chad allowed the corner of his mouth to curl into a triumphant smile. He knew he had succeeded. He had turned my own daughter into a weapon against her father. He was using Amber as a shield, using blood ties to force me into a corner. I looked at Chad's soft hands as they tapped lightly on the fraudulent documents. A parasite trying to drain the last drop of life from an ancient tree. I took a slow, deep breath, forcing down the anger threatening to erupt. My expression settled into the unnerving calm of a hunter. I knew words would never wake Amber up now. She needed to see the true nature of the monster she called her husband with her own eyes. I slowly pushed the documents back across the table toward Chad. I looked directly into his greedy eyes and gave him a cold, unmistakable refusal. That single act drove Chad's obsession to its breaking point, forcing him to search for another path, one that was far darker and far more reckless. After that afternoon, I knew I couldn't sit back and do nothing. Chad had revealed the desperation of a drowning man. A desperate man would do anything when backed into a corner. I needed to know exactly how badly this piece of metal had corroded. The next morning, I met Detective Miller at a small diner on the outskirts of town. Miller was a middle-aged man who spoke very little and worked with the efficiency of a machine. He slid a thick leather envelope across the table. I opened it. Page after page revealed horrifying truths. Chadwick Montgomery didn't own a single investment fund. The company bearing his name was nothing more than an empty shell built on phantom paperwork. He had gambled away his family's savings through online casinos and illegal cryptocurrency schemes. Now he owed an enormous debt of $2 million to some of the city's most notorious crime syndicates. His repayment deadline had long since passed. Debt collectors had already begun delivering ultimatums. He needed an enormous amount of money, and he needed it immediately if he wanted to stay alive. But what tightened my chest came on the next page. Chad hadn't been gambling with only his own money. He had secretly drained Amber's bank accounts. Using the pretense of investment opportunities, he had signed loan documents backed by collateral. My daughter's little flower shop, the only dream she had ever truly built for herself, was now standing on the edge of bankruptcy. The lender had already sent foreclosure notices to the shop. Amber knew absolutely nothing about it. She still trusted her charming husband completely. She still defended him in front of her father. All the while he was quietly pushing her toward the edge of the abyss. The anger inside me didn't erupt into a shout. It condensed into something far colder, like structural steel frozen inside an ice vault. My calloused hands tightened around the documents until the pages crumpled beneath my grip. Chad had crossed the line. He wasn't merely a greedy son-in-law anymore. He was a parasite feeding on my daughter's blood to keep himself alive. I paid Miller and walked back to my truck. Rain began to speckle the windshield. I rested my forehead against the steering wheel, calculating every move that would come next. A starving man would never hesitate to seize any bait thrown before him. He wanted money. He wanted Warehouse 42. I was going to give him a reason to risk everything. With my own hands, I would place the most irresistible bait imaginable right in the center of the steel trap until he could no longer resist and willingly walked himself to his own destruction. I returned to my office at Warehouse 42 and began designing the trap. The rat had become desperate with hunger. Now it was time to place the cheese inside the steel trap. The next day, I asked Amber to come to my office. I deliberately told her to have Chad pick her up after work. I knew with absolute certainty that Chad would come inside to look around. Before they arrived, I placed a blue file stamped confidential on my desk. Inside was a quality certification and ownership record for a shipment of raw platinum ingots worth $15 million, supposedly stored in the secure vault at Warehouse 42. Of course, every page was a forgery crafted so perfectly that not a single detail could expose it. Just as I had expected, Chad walked into my office wearing his usual polished appearance. I pretended to be tired, absent-minded, and forgetful. I deliberately stood up and asked Amber to come with me to inspect a few old engine blocks out in the scrapyard. That left Chad alone in my office for 10 full minutes. He believed it was the careless mistake of a stubborn old man. He had no idea that a tiny hidden camera had been mounted above my desk lamp aimed directly at his face. I sat inside my pickup truck in the yard and opened the live camera feed on my phone. The screen captured every movement with perfect clarity. The instant the office door closed, Chad's polished gentleman's act disappeared. He lunged toward my desk like a predator attacking its prey. He flipped open the blue file. His eyes widened the moment he saw the figure $15 million in platinum. Greed, pure, uncontrollable greed twisted across his face. His carefully manicured hands trembled so violently that he nearly dropped the folder. He hurriedly pulled out his expensive phone and photographed every page, every diagram, every storage location, every access code for Warehouse 42. He swallowed over and over, muttering to himself while wearing the smile of a madman. He believed he had found the ticket that would change his life, the treasure that would erase every debt and launch him into the future he dreamed of. I switched off the screen. My face remained as cold as ice. The rat had caught the scent of the cheese. He had taken the bait without the slightest suspicion. I walked calmly back toward the office. When I entered, Chad hurriedly slipped his phone into his pocket and acted as though nothing had happened. He greeted me with exaggerated politeness. But this trap had never been only about money. I needed to force him to reveal the most ruthless part of himself, so my daughter could finally see down to the marrow of her bones the true cruelty of the man she had chosen to marry. Garrett heard the recording that afternoon, and immediately made plans to act that very night during the storm. After Chad photographed the fake file, I knew he would make his move immediately. But I needed undeniable proof. Something that would shatter every last trace of Amber's blindness. Before he left my office that day, I pretended to pat him on the shoulder and compliment his expensive leather briefcase. My rough hands quickly slipped a tiny listening device beneath the leather lining of the case. Late the following afternoon, I sat alone in my dark office. The audio from the listening device streamed to my phone through my earpiece. I could hear the noise of an underground bar. Loud music, glasses clinking together. Then Chad's voice came through. He was talking to the loan shark. His voice no longer carried its usual polished elegance. It was filled with agitation, trembling, and cruelty. He talked about Warehouse 42. He talked about the $15 million worth of platinum. The loan shark sounded suspicious and asked him about Amber. The man said that if Chad failed to repay the debt on time, they would take Amber as payment. Chad's answer made every drop of blood in my body seem to freeze. He let out a cold, emotionless laugh. The laugh of a demon. He said casually, "Go ahead and deal with my wife if you have to. I don't care anymore. Tonight I'm breaking into Warehouse 42 to take that platinum. Once I have the money, I'm flying straight to Dubai. Do whatever you want with that bitch. She's worthless to me now." I took off my earpiece. The room fell completely silent. The only sound was my heartbeat, steady, powerful, and cold. The rage inside me didn't explode into reckless action. It hardened into something terrifyingly calm. Chad had just signed his own death warrant. He was willing to sell out the woman who shared his bed, willing to sell my daughter to criminals in exchange for his own freedom. A man like that deserved no mercy. He believed he was the predator. He believed he was about to soar toward the promised land. But he had no idea that the steel trap had already begun to close. Every gear was turning, preparing to crush him into 100 pieces. I stood up and picked up my truck keys. The weather forecast had warned that a massive storm would hit tonight. The perfect time for a purge. I had to go pick up Amber immediately before that rat realized he had already lost his last shield. On that night, rain poured down relentlessly. The sky was as black as ink. I drove my old pickup through the flooded streets, heading straight for Amber's house. I called her, my voice calm but carrying unmistakable urgency. I told her there was a serious problem at her flower shop and that I needed her to come with me immediately. Amber hurried out to the truck, panic written across her face, still wearing her pajamas. She had no idea what was really happening. I didn't say a single word during the drive. The pickup sped through the storm while the windshield wipers struggled at full speed. As we approached the outskirts of Warehouse 42, I switched off the headlights. I parked in a dark corner hidden behind enormous piles of scrap steel. From there, we had a clear view of the entire west gate. Amber looked out the window, recognized the location, and turned toward me in confusion. She asked why I had brought her to the scrapyard at this hour. I didn't answer. Instead, I quietly switched on the tablet mounted on the center console. The screen connected directly to the infrared security cameras outside the gate of Warehouse 42 and to the listening device hidden inside Chad's briefcase. Amber narrowed her eyes at the display. Only a few seconds later, a black vehicle pulled up. 3 figures stepped out into the driving rain. The man in front carried a large pair of bolt cutters and quickly snapped the chain, securing the gate. The infrared camera illuminated his face with perfect clarity. It was Chadwick Montgomery. The 2 men behind him were dressed in black and visibly armed. Amber gasped and reached for the door, ready to jump out of the truck. I immediately placed my calloused hand firmly on her shoulder. The weight of a steelworker's hand kept her from moving. I motioned for her to stay silent and pointed toward the screen where the audio was about to begin. Chad's voice came through the truck's speakers crystal clear and chillingly cold. He was grumbling at the 2 men with him. He told them to hurry up with the lock because the $15 million worth of platinum was waiting inside. One of the men asked whether he was certain and whether this would put his wife in danger once the loan sharks came looking for him. Chad answered in a voice so cold and ruthless it was revolting. "Forget that bitch. By tomorrow I'll be in Dubai with the money. Amber's life isn't worth a single penny compared to that platinum." Amber froze. Her entire body began trembling uncontrollably. Her eyes widened as tears streamed down her cheeks, overwhelmed by shock and unbearable pain. Her entire world collapsed in a single second. The polished, charming husband, the man she had defended against her own father, was nothing more than a monster willing to sell her to save himself. Amber collapsed back into the seat, buried her face in her hands, and sobbed silently. The naked truth stood before her at last, as devastating as a fatal knife wound. I watched my daughter fall apart. The pain cut through me, yet my face remained frighteningly calm. I knew this poison was the only cure for the blindness that had consumed her. Chad was now approaching the massive steel door of Warehouse 42. He believed he was moments away from claiming unimaginable wealth. He had no idea that there wasn't a single gram of platinum waiting inside. What awaited him beyond that door was a death sentence with no escape, one I had designed with my own hands. If you've stayed with this story all the way to this point, then I hope you've found it worthwhile. Please take a quick moment to like and subscribe. Leave a number 5 in the comments so I'll know you've made it this far and include the name of the city you love. Many people watch without doing it, but it costs you nothing and means a great deal to us. Amber's muffled sobs were swallowed by the roar of the rain outside the truck. I gently patted my daughter's shoulder, my eyes still fixed on the surveillance screen. On the monitor, Chad and his 2 accomplices had crossed the yard. They now stood in front of the massive steel door of Warehouse 42. Chad pulled a paper diagram from his jacket pocket. He entered the access code he had secretly photographed in my office. A series of mechanical beeps echoed through the night. The heavy locking mechanism inside the door shifted. A dry metallic click followed. The steel door slowly swung open. Excitement bordering on madness spread across Chad's face. His carefully manicured hands trembled as he shoved the door open and stepped inside. The 2 armed men followed close behind. The interior of Warehouse 42 was pitch black. Chad quickly switched on his phone's flashlight, sweeping the beam across the enormous room in search of the crates of platinum. But before he could get his bearings, the entire warehouse suddenly exploded with light. Not the glow of ordinary fixtures. It was a network of high-intensity floodlights mounted in all 4 corners of the ceiling, igniting simultaneously. The blinding brightness forced Chad and his accomplices to shield their eyes as they staggered backward. At that exact moment, a piercing alarm erupted. Not the alarm of a private scrapyard. It was a specialized tactical alarm. From behind the reinforced concrete walls, dozens of heavily armed federal agents wearing body armor burst into the room. The black barrels of their rifles were instantly trained on the heads of the 3 intruders. A sharp command thundered through the warehouse, louder than the storm outside. FBI, drop your weapons, get on your knees immediately, move and we will open fire. The 2 men with Chad instantly dropped their guns, raised their hands above their heads and threw themselves onto the floor. The bolt cutters slipped from Chad's hands and clanged against the concrete. Every trace of color drained from his face. He stammered. His legs shook so violently that he could barely remain standing. He looked around the warehouse. There wasn't a single crate of platinum anywhere. Instead, rows of steel racks held stacks of high-denomination U.S. currency sealed and secured. The horrifying twist struck Chad like a lightning bolt. Warehouse 42 had never been a scrapyard storage facility. Nor was it a hidden vault for smuggled platinum. It was a covert federal currency transfer station, perfectly disguised as the Vance scrapyard. What Chad never knew was that before I became an old scrapyard owner, I had spent 20 years serving as the government's senior security advisor. I had personally designed the security system protecting Warehouse 42. By breaking in with armed accomplices, Chadwick Montgomery was no longer just a family thief. He had officially committed a high-level federal felony. He had walked into a fortress from which there would be no escape. From inside the pickup truck, Amber stared silently at the screen. The pain in her eyes gradually gave way to overwhelming horror as she watched government agents surround her husband. I slowly opened the truck door. My calloused hands gripped a black umbrella. I turned toward my daughter, my voice frighteningly calm. It's time for us to go watch this rat struggle in the mud. I held the umbrella over Amber as we walked into Warehouse 42. The sound of our footsteps echoed across the damp concrete floor in sharp, hollow beats. The air was thick with the smell of gunpowder and tension. In the middle of the vast warehouse, Chadwick Montgomery was on his knees. His soft, well-manicured hands were now locked behind his back in a pair of cold steel handcuffs. His expensive suit was soaked with rainwater and covered in dirt, but his greatest humiliation lay beneath him. Terrified by the federal agents pointing their weapons at him, Chad had wet himself. A spreading stain soaked through his costly trousers. He trembled like a stray dog cornered with nowhere left to run, tears and mucus streaming down his face. The moment he saw Amber and me walk inside, a pitiful spark of hope flashed across his eyes. He struggled forward on his knees toward us, his voice twisted with panic as he cried, "Amber, please save me. Dad, please help me. I was set up. I was only trying to make money for our future. Amber, please tell the agents. I'm your husband." Amber stopped 3 steps away from him. She looked directly at the man kneeling on the floor. Not another tear fell. Her pain had transformed into complete disgust. Seeing the puddle beneath him, and the pathetic cowardice he displayed, Amber finally realized how blind she had been to trust such a worthless man. She turned away, without giving him so much as another word or a single glance of pity. One of the federal agents walked over to me and nodded respectfully. I silently motioned for them to take him away. 2 agents hauled Chad to his feet, and dragged him toward the armored transport vehicle, waiting outside in the pouring rain. He never stopped screaming Amber's name in desperation. The following morning, Amber and I sat together in my familiar office. The rain had stopped. Only the soft dripping of water from the eaves remained. A monitored phone call from the Federal Detention Center came through to Amber. Chad's voice was hoarse with panic. He believed Amber still loved him. Between sobs, he begged her to convince me to post bail for him. He promised he would spend the rest of his life making up for everything he had done. Amber stared at the phone as his desperate pleas echoed through the speaker. Her hands trembled. Her eyes, however, were completely cold. I stepped forward, took the phone from my daughter's hand, and ended the conversation in a low, unwavering voice that struck like the final blow of a hammer sealing a coffin. "Enjoy your 25 years without bail, son-in-law. You called my scrap business garbage. But you forgot one thing. I'm an expert at disposing of garbage. And where you belong now is in society's junkyard." I ended the call without a moment's hesitation. The lifeless tone echoed through the room. The traitor's fate had been sealed. But for Amber, the wound was far deeper. She had lost everything: her trust and the flower shop she had poured her heart into, now standing on the brink of bankruptcy. I stood up and opened the hidden safe concealed behind the painting on the wall. The time had finally come to place the last key into my daughter's hands. The true inheritance a quiet father had prepared long ago to protect his own flesh and blood. I placed the antique oak box on my desk. Amber walked into the office. Although traces of exhaustion still lingered on her face, the clarity had returned to her eyes. She sat down across from me. I slowly slid the box toward my daughter. Inside was a thick stack of legal documents and a black bank card. "This is the secret trust fund I established for you 10 years ago, Amber. It is completely independent and protected by the highest level of confidentiality. No one, including your husband, has the authority to touch a single cent of it. This money is enough for you to pay off every debt tied to your flower shop and build a new life on a much stronger foundation." Amber looked at the documents, then threw herself into my arms and burst into tears. These tears were no longer for Chad's betrayal. They were tears of gratitude and deep overdue remorse. She finally realized that while she had been manipulated by a con man's sweet words into turning her back on her family, this rough old father had quietly remained behind her all along, using his calloused hands to weave the strongest safety net for her life. I embraced my daughter. The morning sunlight of a new day began shining through the frosted glass, filling the room. Outside in the scrapyard, the rusted steel glistened beneath the sun. Steel may rust with time, but the true values of a real family never waver in the face of any storm. Life is always filled with people like Chadwick Montgomery. They use polished appearances and extravagant promises to conceal the decay and boundless greed within. They look down on honest working people. They mistake the silence of those who came before them for weakness. What they fail to understand is that the calmness of an experienced man is not weakness. It is strength accumulated over a lifetime. It is careful preparation for the decisive blow when the line has finally been crossed. Never underestimate a man who spends his entire life building an empire from scrap. He knows how to dispose of the garbage that threatens his family. Always stay alert when unexpected fortunes appear, and never turn your back on the people who stood beside you through hardship. Family and self-respect are the only things that can never be given a price. Thank you for joining Dad's Real Life Revenge. Don't forget to share your story in the comments, and like and subscribe so you won't miss the next valuable lesson. See you in the next video.